In 2013, a female relative of Albert Perry, an African-American man from South Carolina, submitted a sample of his DNA to a company called Family Tree to trace family roots during the routine DNA analysis. Technicians at the genetic testing company made an extremely rare discovery. Albert Perry contained a Y chromosome with a genetic signature like no other. Y chromosomes are the hereditary factor, determining the male sex. Albert Perry's SCHW chromosome revealed that the most recent common ancestor for his lineage was roaming the Earth. About 338,000 years ago, geneticists have proven that all men tested thus far in these commercial databases can trace their bi-chromosome to a common male ancestor, labeled Adam, who lived between 60,000 and 140,000 years ago. This made his DNA over twice as old as any fossil on record for Homo sapien. Now scientists are questioning everything that is known about the time and location of the first people on Earth. Is this finally the proof pre-Adamite theorists had been looking for, that there really were human civilizations before the age of Adam and Eve? And if so, what other doors can Perry's DNA open? When we look at these Predates records of what these guys are telling us, it maps together very nicely with the actual archaeological ruins that we find around the world. What gets even more interesting is when we get into the idea that in the post-Atlantean catastrophe world, meaning post-12,000, 500 years ago, two primate groups survived with vastly limited resources. One group in Europe and Asia becomes the Egyptian phonic line. The other group in Mesoamerica becomes the Mesoamerican priesthood. If Albert Perry's Y chromosome predates this by hundreds of thousands of years, what are the implications? Is it possible there was an earlier human population that became extinct? An incredible artifact that has been a topic of great controversy among historians and scholars trying to get to the bottom of this mystery. Is a king's list found in the Sumerian uniforms? The king lists go back 200,000 years. That's kind of interesting, because modern scientists believe that the first humans like us came into existence less than 200,000 years ago. And they believe that the first civilizations, where you would have kings in urban areas and social organization, all started 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. So to have these Maron king lists going back 200,000 years is really amazing. The actual artifact itself is engraved in uniform text during that time. And era people didn't carve these types of things into stone just for a hobby. It's real information, real data, and real history. Now, the actual artifact itself is located in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, England. What's so incredible about it is that the King's List gives the reign of the kings and chars. Well, what is a Esh? The Sumerian state that this ET is about. 600 years, for example. King Elam actually ruled for 10 chars, so in human years, that would be 36,000 years. Could it really be true that humans were on Earth so long ago, and not just humans, but advanced civilizations with hierarchies and kings? It's not just the Sumerian King's List, it's also the Egyptian King's List of Manthal, which writes about dynasties going back maybe not as long, but at least 30,000 BC. Gods like Theas and other deities were called the 9 particular reigning deities of the Egyptian world. So if these deities have again lifespans of thousands of years, then to a human, it would seem they are gods. But if humans had been around for close to 300,000 years, according to Albert Perry's DNA test, why do all these creation stories come from a much later time? And why do we hold on to the truths given to us by these gods? Researcher and historian Anton Parks has a disturbing theory about this. You have to know that when the gods arrived on Earth, according to what the tablets state, they reigned over the Earth for thousands of years. Elements of the story are in the Zohar, the Nagadi text as well, which basically tell the same story in the same version as the Sumerian one. to enslave mankind, human beings, must behave, not think too much, and most of all, not see that there is another reality to what is said. In the texts of E, there is a curious scene. It describes humans specially created to work in the garden. But at some point, in order to enforce their laws, the gods place the humans in front of them. Behind the gods is their shiny chariot. That is how it is written. And they make them pledge allegiance. It is fascinating. They impose their views upon mankind. They want to scare them, and sadly, through this oath to which humanity commits, humans forbid themselves to ever be free. I personally think that to this day we are still under the influence of this oath. It is crucial to understand that in concrete terms we are still slaves. I think that the gods knew what an oath implied. A vow is something tangible, something actually happens, and I think that this can be passed from one life to another as a species that was created by DNA manipulation. We've never been free from the manipulation of beings on the outside, and that the sad irony in history is the humans have gotten down on their knees to things standing in front of them that had the name God, and they were never gods. If they weren't gods, is it possible that these beings were able to manipulate human DNA to such a point that the original free-roaming human species became part of a worker class with shorter lives and of less power? When we look at the Sumer and Kings list, we see that the more recent part of the list actually corresponds very nicely with historical records. That's very interesting, because when you look at the Kings list in its entirety, you go all the way back to the alleged origin of the Anunnaki on Earth, tinkering with our DNA. Starting 250,000 years ago, supposedly, when you get into this Sumerian doctrine, the idea is that we were created as a slave race approximately 250,000 years ago, and it was Anki, supposedly the good guy in the battle of the two brothers, Ani and Enlil, who created us this way, and we were manufactured by Ani to become able to reproduce, whereas if the lifespan of our early kings was 36,000 years, it appears something in our evolution changed. 1,500 years ago, in the book of Genesis, God said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 20 years. Did human lives get shortened at some point? Is this proof that there was a genetic manipulation, and if so, why the long known human lifespan that modern scientists have on record? A woman who died in the French countryside in 1997 was 122. Since then, there has been significant debate about whether modern man has reached the upper limits of our longevity. Mila in the scriptures lived a long time. We have these stories. Did God intervene and change our DNA? So now we only get 75 years, or 150 years, or some shorter period. If so, why would there be any way to find this, to get this back? Or is working on some other level? Do we have longer or shorter lives in a spiritual sense, in a psychological sense, in an emotional sense? Has the rush of modern life shortened our lived experience? And is there some way to gain the enormity, the expanse of time that we want new? In my research, I use the term devolution or devolved, and for me that means a couple of things. One thing it means is that as conscious beings, we originally exist on some higher level of reality that I call the level of pure consciousness, and the ruling principle of that level of pure consciousness is harmonious. Loving cooperation among all conscious beings and the source of all conscious being. Some conscious elves become egotistical. They develop a desire to control, dominate and exploit others, and they can no longer exist on that higher level of pure consciousness. There has to be some other reality for them to act out their selfish desires to dominate, control, and exploit others. That is the material level of reality, so that process by which a conscious self descends from that higher level of reality into the world of matter is what I called evolution. So the conscious selves on this level of reality are devolved, and that means they don't evolve up from matter. They devolve or come down from this higher level of reality. Did we as humans at one point exist in a higher reality, and then at one point devolved into a lower level? If so, what could be the reason? Anton Park suggests that there is information that points to certain bloodline when you start looking at these subjects. Whether it is on the web or in some books that people qualify as possibly conspiracy books, it is often spoken of a genetic lineage reptilian and of royal blood. I do think that some royal bloodlings still exist nowadays that come from the Anunnaki, specifically the lineage of Unoa. And could these descendants of royal bloodlines be able to see beyond the current reality in order to control? Could this be more evidence of a tampering with our DNA? Reporter Linda has an interesting theory on the origins of the term. Blue blood. One friend and colleague of mine was Lawrence Gardner. He was tracking the whole significance of certain bloodlines going back into Mesopotamia. I was encountering exactly the same information coming into my investigations of an alien presence on this planet. And throughout the solar system, we found that we met at sort of a same point. And that was that in Mesopotamia, all of the Anunnaki were supposed to be reptilian, and that the reptilian biology had blood that was dominated by copper, and that they literally had blue-colored blood. We have red because we have an iron-dominant blood. So our discussion from his history, and my trying to get into it through aliens that had been dominating the Earth, was that the blue blood reptilians of Mesopotamia led to a group called the Mayans, and the Mayans tie later in the timeline directly to France, Germany, and that area of Europe, because for some reason Lawrence Gardner and other people's work coming through royalty, blue blood, tie this connection between the reptilians, Mayans in Mesopotamia, and they were literally a reptilian blue bloodline. If this is more evidence of manipulation, how does our DNA and an oath hold weight in our current reality? Anand Parks explains how his studies of several ancient texts reveal similar stories about humankind surrendering their will to Sumerian gods, but that in the end, we choose to kneel. I think that we are still under the influence of the oath sworn by humanity in front of the gods and their chariot. At this particular point, humanity forbade itself from ever knowing freedom, and from thinking freely, they more or less enslaved themselves. We can see that in general, human beings are quite submissive when certain laws pass nowadays. Instead of saying that we don't agree, we first say yes, and if we find a couple of brave men who are ready to protest. In that case, things can get moving, but it can take decades or hundreds of years before anything happens. Slavery is a good example. Therefore, I think we are still under the oath that the human race swore to the Sumerian gods in front of their spaceship. I think that there are several ways of breaking this type of oath. First of all, by acknowledging it, by allowing oneself, and by saying it out loud, I'm not anymore under the oath that was sworn to the UN newness. And this works for any of from the moment when you know you have sworn an oath in this life or in a previous one, you can actually liberate yourself. Quite simply, could it be possible to liberate ourselves from our stricted boundaries? Here on Earth, could we evolve back into our original state? Originally, we all exist as beings of pure consciousness, on a higher level of reality. The reason we're here is somehow or other, we've made decisions that disqualify us from existing on that higher plane. So the main purpose of human life, according to many ancient wisdom traditions, is to restore consciousness to its original pure state, and there are higher beings in this universe who are trying to help us do that. And one of the ways that they help us do that is by providing places on Earth where it becomes easier to engage in the processes of meditation. At help, you could call them embassies from the spiritual world. The movement of ancient knowledge is really hardwired into the understanding of perfection. Harmony, from these places, the idea was to bring into physical focus that which is absolutely perfect. The idea was to build in the center of these cities a temple of humanity, where everything that is perfect in terms of measure, geometry, energy, everything that is invisible is manifested in formal space that allows an entire society to vibrate to that perfection and become perfect within self. So depending on who's got control of all of this, it works and then it doesn't. If you go to central Paris, there is a sense that there's something perfect about it. This is why we're drawn to it. Luxor in Egypt, which itself is also a mirror image of places in Samaria, and they are a mirror image of temples which are no longer above the ground. They're now underwater. So the idea was always the same, to establish perfection on earth, so that humans can realize their greatest potential. It's just about working with energy. Energy doesn't know what it is. Energy is just energy. It's not right or wrong if you add intent to it. It defines the direction where the energy goes, and that was the idea behind all the ancient cultures to, create these ancient ideas, put your correct intent into it, and create greatness or not. Could these ancient places hold the keys to evolving past the current system? If so, how old might the current system be when we look at our modern civilization? Asian, and we think that we've evolved so much. Let's not forget that Sumer is the cradle of civilization, and that so much of what started there is still in place in our modern world. This includes the entire system of how we measure time. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, the way in which we structure our cities, the idea of plumbing, the idea of city planning, with streets and building. All of that stuff comes directly from this Sumerian background, which seems to, in conventional historical view, pop up almost out of nowhere from what had been up until then a hunter-gatherer type of culture. We also see the whole basis of the Code of Hammurabi and written codified laws, which actually started again in Sumer. We see the development of a money system in Su. We see the roles of men and women, this sort of patriarchal society also appearing in Su, and therefore so much of what we have in our modern world hasn't changed since the time of Sumer. And if we expand our consciousness a little bit and consider that the written history of Sumer is not what we hear about in our textbooks, that it actually is a 250,000-year-old civilization, it would appear that with the money system comes the ability for small groups of people to determine who lives and who dies, who eats and who starves, to become incredibly powerful because there is no common sharing of the wealth of the planet. It seems to be acceptable to the people. It seems that it's a fair system, but it's very easily controlled by the elite power structure, and it allows them to effectively imprison an entire planet, and it allows them to wield an unnaturally high degree of control. Are we in the end just acting out an embedded loop that runs like a play where all that we know is based on Sumerian rule by imposing gods? If this is true, are we able and willing to break it and evolve by setting up situations that are very challenging, where there's war, there's death, there's suffering? We're all presented with choices again and again in our life, and if you choose the negative, it just means you chose the negative. And when you die, you look back and like, wow, I chose the negative, and next time you'll try to program yourself so that hopefully you become more and more positive. Could the clues and symbols depicted in ancient civilizations help us change the current gate? Could we evolve from our current state and possibly live longer like the gods of ancient times, for example? If the system that we reside in now is created to run on duality consciousness, that would be the choice between the positive and the negative. Then could we break it with a unity consciousness, which is the understanding that one spirit moves through everything, and there is no separation? In the ancient mythology, there was a strong tendency to tell stories of the battle of good and evil, and certain gods would represent the forces of evil and want control, and they would be arrogant, and the good God would finally prevail, and you would have certain areas where these battles took place we can see immediately. Believe that this is a philosophical construct, that in fact there are temptations. There's certainly the possibility of corruption in human affairs, and this would get involved in the theology of the time, and we would hope that the good would win out. Was this the point of knowledge given to us in the proverbial garden? Could the point of characters labeled as good and evil in the ancient text be the continued story of duality that we live in today? And do we have all the information to understand where we are and how to break free from our current system? For if this is a forced reality upon us, can we break it by understanding that we have the Jack Carey explains a possible link between agricultural and human development that literally popped up overnight. At first there was nothing. Then, all of a sudden, we have civilization after civilization. At mathematics, culture. They're building monuments. They're performing cultural feat. I believe that all of that can be equated to the introduction of these cereal grains into our DNA, because she was actually affecting human DNA at that time through a number of different experiments.